All right, thank you. So last week we talked about compassion, raccoon. Anything, I know we didn't watch the Bible Project video on it. And so we were so busy talking about compassion and mercy that we didn't get to it. But any thoughts on last week's with
I wasn't
compassion?
here. I was doing
Okay.
real estate stuff.
That's right. Yeah.
Say it again.
I was doing looking through paperwork with my real estate agent last Monday, so I wasn't here.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Yeah, it was lively, but I gotta think. Where's my notes? I think the big thing that I thought about raccoon was that wasn't it like the wrath compared to, we were kind of stuck on, wow. His compassion is strong and powerful and always there, but we still live out the consequences.
Right.
So compassion doesn't cover consequences, but compassion is available. You still get the lesson.
Right. And compassion also with that it's more than just like getting the lesson too, but it's also, it's an emotion. It's contrasted with anger in the Bible. And it was this like, a lot of times it's paired with partnering with like a parent, a compassionate parent, to guide or care for is another way that this word is often used. And it's often paired with forgiveness. So even though there are consequences, it's paired with forgiveness, and forgiveness is a renewal of relationship as well, and a freedom from what has been done. Even though there are consequences, there's freedom from what has been done. It's also used as like a rescuing from suffering. And so where there's suffering, to be compassionate is to like rescue from that suffering. And then it's used as well in places both, so mostly it's used to describe God, but there are some places where it's used to describe humans too. And when it's used to describe humans, it's used sometimes as where the powerful have compassion. So it's something that you have power over another, and you can show them, you use it to reduce harm or to do good to another. And that would be to show compassion. And so then when we think about that with God, God, creator of universe, obviously has power over the universe to have power over, and yet would use that power in a way that would not create harm, but that would do good. And that is part of the compassion or rakum. It's also sometimes translated as merciful too. So that would be another piece of it. And so as we're looking at these, I know we spent a fair amount of time too, just talking about Exodus chapter 34. And so Exodus 34, verse 6 and 7. And these are just like when we looked at the where we took 2 verses, and that's what we were really focusing on. This is the verse we are going to be focusing on through the end of May. So Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. And what we're looking at is the pieces of who do we hear that God is? What are the characteristics of God? So Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed. Some things we noted last time was this is like God speaking. This is not Moses speaking for God, which is usually what's happened in this book. It's actually God is proclaiming this. And you'll see in your book, remember, it's got Lord in all caps. So does anybody remember what that means if it's Lord in all caps in your Bible?
So I think that's referring to God, not like a Lord or, a Lord.
Right. And if it's in all caps, it's the word in Hebrew that's being used is Yahweh. And that's why it's in all caps, because there's another word for Lord in Hebrew, Adonai, which is, and that's sometimes used to refer to God, but that would be L capitalized and then O-R-D lowercase. But if it's L and then O-R-D all caps, then the word in Hebrew is Yahweh. So, which remember Yahweh is this word that we spent a whole class on and could have spent so much more too. It's like the I am, I will be, I was, like all throughout time is connected with this. So the I am that Yahweh passed before Moses and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the 1,000th generation, forgiving and transgression and sin, yet visiting the iniquity of the parents on the children and children to the 4th generation. Remember, so right before this is when the Israelites melt down and create the golden calf.
Yeah, and they say, we put some jewelry in the fire and we don't know what happened. A calf came out. Yeah.
And so a calf came out and Moses was really mad. God even more mad. Down and Moses comes and orders about people to be
That part of me, like, we can calm God down.
so important part of Hebrew scriptures is the word Israel means to struggle with God. And if you remember back when the name Israel is given, it's when one goes and struggles with an angel and then receives this name Israel. And it means to struggle with God. And even the word, like the word for answer, in Hebrew isn't like in English when we think about, oh, I found the answer, like this is the definite answer and there's like anything else is wrong. But in Hebrew, answer, the word answer also means humility. And so to hold an answer means to do so with humility. And so remembering that when we're struggling with God, that there's supposed to be this exchange that's happening, because that's what happens in an actual relationship, is there's you're not in a relationship if you just tell the person what to do and there's no actual exchange or conversation. And that's just the dictatorship, or you're just an AI program saying something. Even AI would do a better job of relationships than that. So there's a struggle with God. And then also remember back, we talked about the first king of Israel. Do you remember who the first, anybody remember first king of Israel? The Israelites said, we want a king. And God said, you don't want a king. But when you do want a king, this is what you should look for in a king. And then, do you remember who it was?
I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah.
It was Saul.
Yeah.
So Saul was the first king. And do you know what? Saul became king because he was handsome and like just dark skinned, handsome, like perfectly built. He looked the part of a king. And so he became king. And his name means to ask and to inquire. And this is what God told the people that a good leader should do. A good leader should ask and inquire of God. And the reason why Saul failed at being a king, among many things, is that Saul failed to ask and inquire of both the people and God, even though that's what he was called to do. And why King David, who was the next king, ended up being a good king, even though he had a lot of flaws, did a lot of things wrong, he consistently would ask and inquire and struggle with God. and with the people. And so this is, and it's like woven throughout all of the Hebrew scriptures, this struggle with, which we sometimes forget, like all these years later, as Christianity became tied with Roman Empire and then was pulled out of the hands of the people in some ways when it was just in Latin and you weren't allowed to read the Bible, it's only on the stained glass windows and like pulled out. And it became, oh, only certain people have control over this. And we've forgotten that struggling with is a part of this tradition, long tradition.
It's funny, the name Saul was also a Roman's name,
Mhm.
who later became a Christian and who wrote a good share of the New Testament.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ask and inquire. Well, he asked a lot.
He
Like,
did.
where are the Christians? Let's stone them.
Yeah.
Them guys.
It's all names in the Bible, especially they all have like meanings. So like Noah, any idea what like Noah's Ark, what name would have?
It was comfort.
Comfort, yeah, which is like an interesting name for a guy who lived on an ark with a bunch of animals for a long time.
Well, Mary was supposed to mean bitter. Was she
Was
bitter?
it? I
Were
don't
any of the
know
Marys
Mary.
bitter?
So one thing about the names in the Bible is that it's not just the identity of what the people feel, but what they provide to others. So I don't know about the bitter piece, but like for Noah, like Noah was to provide comfort to others. It's part of their calling.
We had to nurture all those animals,
Yeah,
provide comfort.
yeah.
Wow. Keep them alive.
So back to, we're like looking at Yahweh and what does the name of God mean?
I am.
And so we have in the Bible, we've got these other Hebrew names that have a meaning. And as we've learned in Hebrew, a lot of words have multiple meanings to them. And they have different nuances within them. Well, God, Yahweh, has even more. Like there's a lot. And so it's trying to be described. What does this name mean? And so this part in Exodus 34, especially 6 and 7 are repeated a lot of other places in the Bible. And so that's why we're looking at it here. That God's proclaiming who God's self is. So we have Yahweh, Yahweh, a God, Rachum, and gracious is our next word. So would you like to watch, do we want to watch the Bible Project video for Rachum first? Let's do that. This is for merciful or compassionate. I'm going to share my screen.
Is there a shade of difference between merciful and compassionate?
There's probably many shades, but then the word itself contains a lot of shades within it. So we're using more than one English word to describe a single Hebrew word.
Okay.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Anybody online?
Oh,
Hi, guys.
Hi.
I apologize for being late.
We'll be merciful. That's our word.
I had forgotten. I thought our word tonight was grace.
If you
We're
tried to
getting to that.
describe
Oh,
what God is
okay.
like, it could be difficult or daunting. But when the people who wrote the Bible pondered the mystery of God, they consistently described God's character in this way: compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, overflowing with loyal love and faithfulness. The very first word used in this description of God is compassionate, or in Hebrew, rachum. This word also appears as a noun, rachamim, or compassion. And what's fascinating is that both of these words are related to the Hebrew word for womb, rechem. So compassion in the Hebrew Bible is centered in a person's core, and the word invites us to imagine a mother's tender feelings for her vulnerable infant. So rahum is a word that conveys intense emotion. Sometimes it's even translated as deeply moved, like in the story of King Solomon, who meets two women who've just given birth. One of their babies sadly dies, but then both women claim that the baby still living is theirs. As a test, Solomon says to cut the baby in two and give each mother a half. And the baby's real mother is deeply moved. She would rather the other woman take her baby than see her child die. And it's her compassion that reveals that she's the true mother. But rahum isn't just an emotional word. It also involves action. And surprisingly, the word is used most often to describe God's actions, motivated by his emotions. Like when the Israelites are suffering and oppressed in Egypt, God hears their cries and is compelled by his compassion, his rachamim, to rescue them. Then, as the Israelites travel through the dangerous wilderness, they're hungry and thirsty, and God is Rahum, caring for them as his own child. He provides everything they need, food, water, and clothing, as he personally guides them. So it's no surprise that when Yahweh reveals his character to the Israelites in the wilderness, he begins by saying he's compassionate. But despite Yahweh's continual rachamim, the Israelites turn away from him time and again. They reject Yahweh's compassion and instead give their allegiance to other gods. And rather than showing compassion to each other, they do violence. And their rebellion results in exile, and they're scattered among the nations. And it's in this dark moment in Israel's story that we come to the book of Isaiah, where Yahweh compares himself to a mother full of rachamim toward her baby. He says, can a mother forget her nursing child, or have no compassion or rachamim on the child of her womb? Even if she forgets, I will not forget you. God is full of motherly compassion, and he will rescue his people. And as you read further in Isaiah, you realize that God is going to do this by entering into the suffering of humanity. And this points forward to a time when Jesus comes on the scene. He is Yahweh's deep compassion become human. In Greek, the word compassion is oiktirmos. And as Jesus embraces the sick and cares for the outcast, he is deeply moved by human suffering. Jesus compares himself to a mother hen using her wings to shield her chicks from danger as he gathers people into his embrace. And in the ultimate expression of oiktirmos, Jesus is moved by compassion to enter into humanity's suffering, into death itself, to rescue and bring us near to God. And it's this same life of compassion that Jesus calls his followers to imitate, allowing ourselves to be moved by the pain of others, to embrace the hurting, and to participate in relieving suffering in the world. In this way, we too can embody the compassion of Yahweh, or in Jesus' words, be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Now you can see how fitting it is that compassionate is the first word God uses to describe himself. So when we're in pain or see others suffering, we can be certain that God is deeply moved to respond, and that he's there to meet us with his deep compassion.
Mother. Mhm.
Gretchen, the audio is going in and out. We can't hear.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to send the link. I think it was skipping a little bit here. I think is it still going in and out, or it was just going in and out for the,
Right after the video, then we couldn't hear anything.
That's right.
oh, here now?
Yeah, yes, I can hear now. Yes,
Did you hear during the video?
yes.
Oh, okay. It must have just been switching over.
Yeah, earlier for me too, before the video, I lost you. Mhm.
Yeah, it was like stuttering in and out a little bit.
Okay.
Well, what do you mean? Yeah, Camille.
Good one.
Were you driving today, Camille? Yeah. Okay, figured. Just the super value in church. This is it. Oh, okay.
So our next word is, so we've got a God merciful and gracious. So we've got these two different words here. So this word is Hanun. So transliterated, that would be spelled Khanun. UN.
That's
Hanun.
merciful,
It's
Gracious.
gracious.
It's gracious. I bet it doesn't mean exclamation.
Mind spelling that again, Gretchen, please?
Khanun.
Thank you.
So it means to be gracious. It also comes from the root word chen, meaning favor, like to favor something. And so it's used mostly as this hanun as a verb, to be gracious. Although a chen, the favor aspect or grace or favor, that word is used as a noun about an equal number of times. And so that's kind of how it is used within the Bible.
Mhm.
But what are your, when you hear the word gracious, what do you think of?
Oh, Herb Wilson. Really?
And how about for those who didn't know Herb Wilson, how would you describe that?
Oh my goodness. I had a broken leg. Was at home for 3 solid months with my leg up on the sofa, couldn't move other than to go to the bathroom. And when my rehab finally progressed to the point where I could be in a wheelchair, Herb called me up to ask me how I was doing, and I told him this, and he said, "Oh, that's great. I'll pick you up for Bible study on Friday." And I said, "I'm wheelchair bound." And he said, "That's okay. I've got a wheelchair. I can wheel you to my car." Or I had a wheelchair to go to the car, I'm not sure. But then we had a wheelchair here at church. He brought it down and he wheeled me up and wheeled me back and brought me home. And when I told him, "Herb, I've been allowed to drive now," and this was several weeks later, obviously. And he said, "Oh, that's wonderful." He said, "I'm so glad that you're well enough to drive by yourself, but I am going to miss those lovely conversations we had in the car as we were going to and from church." And I thought, how gracious can you be? It was just beautiful. That's gracious to me, there to the nth degree.
There's a scripture I think matches that story really well. So Psalm 45 verse 2.
Yes. Yeah.
You are the most handsome of men. Grace in this word is chen is poured upon your lips. Therefore, God has blessed you forever. What do others have?
You are the fairest of the sons of men. Grace is poured upon your lips. Therefore, God has blessed you forever. Just my first part. A to A is different.
I
What
have,
do you got?
you are the most excellent of men, and your lips have been anointed with grace, since God has blessed you forever.
Oh, that's lovely. I like that.
Where was, I was on the phone, sorry, where's this?
Psalm 45, verse
Verse
2.
2.
Thank you.
We have it here, chen can be on the lips, like your lips can be, so your speech could be blessed.
Mm-hmm.
So what would that, I think the story of Doc Wilson is one example of how that could be done. Any
Mhm.
other thoughts on that? It could also mean like in poetry, if a poet speaks very elegantly or charmingly, that
Mhm.
would be chen as well. Chen to be on their lips. There's another one, Proverbs 22, verse 11.
What was the chapter, did you say?
Proverbs 22, verse 11. Those who have a pure heart and are chen in speech will have the king as a friend.
Mhm.
Those who love a pure heart, I think I read it wrong. Those who love a pure heart and are chen in speech will have the king as a friend. Any thoughts on, so we've got this one again, that to be gracious in speech, to be chen, brings that to a, like that makes connections between people and can make high up connections too. There's like an elegance of this type of whatever this word means. There's an elegance to it. Also in Proverbs, if we go forward in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 9.
What was the chapter again?
Chapter 1. I'm going to start at 8. Hear,
Yeah.
my child, your father's instruction. Do not reject your mother's teaching. For they are a fair garland for your head and pendants for your neck. This would be, for they are chen, garland for your head and pendants for your neck. We have this word that's also being used to describe an object as well. You could have like this wreath on their head that is chen. So it could be the speech, it can be an object that is seen as this chen. And it's used quite a bit in poetry. So it's used a number of different places in the Proverbs and in Psalms. Let's look at one more in Proverbs. So this is Proverbs chapter 33. I'm sorry, 31. Chapter 31, verse 30. Not a chapter. Well, I'll put 10 in mine, and then we'll read them from different translations. 10
Right.
is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised.
Mhm. That's my version.
What word do people have for 10 here?
I have the word charm.
Okay.
Yeah, charm and grace. Mm.
Excuse me.
I was writing the other ones down and then I lost track.
Yeah,
Where are we at?
Proverbs 31, verse 30. We have chen here can also be deceiving. So this gracious is not just something in and of itself that is a good thing. It is. It can be elegant. It can be charming. It could mean kind of this showing of favor. But what's important is how it's being used as well. So we have it that it's poured upon one's lips. It allows one to create connections. It is like a wreath of beauty on the head, or like beautiful ornaments. But it also could be deceitful. So in some ways, this chen is viewed in the eyes of, and it has this like recipient or somebody who's figuring out, okay, if I look at this, in what way is this being received as well?
Hmm. Boy, I would have to go an awful long way to relate that to being gracious. Are you talking putting on a deceitful front that looks charming, that looks?
Well, charm could be used in a positive way. Charm could be used in a negative way.
Yes, yes.
Grace could be used in a positive way. You could give grace in a negative way too. That could lead somebody in a negative way.
Not unless her name is Grace.
So that's what in Hebrew, it's a much more wider meaning of this word.
Mhm, mhm. That's the problem. I think we've got tunnel vision when it comes to a great many of these words. That's why we think we know it all when we read something like that.
Well, when I think of charming, I always think of Prince Charming and like, oh yeah, right. I mean, how artificial that could be. And my like amplification says they don't mention once in this description of this perfect woman about her beauty, and that her beauty comes from her attributes. But all those attributes, just like without love, it's a sounding brass, it's a gong, it's, it just without belief in God, you can have all these attributes. But if it isn't because of God, if it isn't faith in God, all that is nothing.
Okay.
So let's add more layers to this now. So let's go to Genesis. Genesis chapter 42, verse 21. Genesis 42,
Verse 21.
So this is within the story of Joseph's brothers have come to him and they're asking for assistance. And Joseph has asked for the brother. And so this is what they said. They said to one another, "Alas, we are paying the penalty for what we did to our brother. We saw his anguish when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That is why this anguish has come upon us." So the words in this, "Alas, we are paying the penalty for what we did to our brother. We saw his anguish when he chen with us, but we did not listen."
Oh, so pleading?
Yeah.
Oh,
So to plead or to like to beg favor of would be another way. How do people have a different wording in English?
Grovel.
Bravo, okay,
Distress anguish.
okay. So
Big,
it's not the trust piece, it's like the
Anguish.
begging piece.
Oh,
The
okay.
pleading
The
piece.
pleaded, yeah, we pleaded with us to let him go, yet we would not listen to his cry.
he begged with us.
Yeah, so if you think about this, so it means this word in its many different forms in Hebrew, chen in the chanun, mean like favor, elegance, charming, and it can also mean to like ask favor of, to beg favor of, which that is what pleading is in like as in this story, to ask favor of. So when their brothers saw, they saw their brother's anguish, and he asked favor of them, but they didn't give it to him. And that's why now they're paying that penalty, they feel. And it's used like this in other ways too. So if we go to the book of Esther,
so who is Reuben in this story?
that is one of the brothers.
Okay, because one of the brothers is like, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against this boy?"
Mhm.
It's like, where was he when they were throwing him in the pit?
He did say not to, and then he goes along with it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
he's like, "I told you so."
Mhm. Mhm.
But I'm not gonna do anything
But
about it.
then I did it anyways.
What are we looking for now?
Esther.
Esther. Ugh,
So I don't think we've read from Esther much. Esther,
I don't even know where it is.
chapter 4,
Give me a hint.
just after Chronicles.
Okay.
And then you get into Ezra, but Chronicles is the easiest one. And
Yep,
then
yep.
Nehemiah, and then Esther.
Arrowroad. Esther chapter
4, verse 8. It's in between there.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to read this one and see where a form of Ken would be?
I can't pronounce all the words.
Okay, I'm sure back. Which chapter again? I'm lost.
Chapter 4, verse
Okay.
8.
Thank you.
Esther.
Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people.
Beg for mercy and plead.
Beg for mercy and plead. Yep.
I've got to seek his favor and plead.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message.
We have two different words that are being used in here. We have this to beg a favor, ask of mercy. Mine has make supplication and entreat him. So one of these, the first one is the chen, although the translation may have switched them, but chen in here. So here's another one to like plead for, to request supplication, to ask favor of. And it's used in ways, so we've seen asking favor of people who had power over. It is also used in ways to show favor to somebody, even if they have lower social status as well. So it's used both ways within scriptures. Let's go to Exodus, and we're at another layer. So Exodus 12, verse 36.
Verse 36.
Yep. Exodus chapter 12, verse 36.
Look favorably on.
Yeah. And Yahweh had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians so that they let them have what they asked, and so they plundered the Egyptians. And Yahweh had given the people favor in sight of the Egyptians. In the sight of the Egyptians.
Well, is that the way to act?
Sometimes we place moral judgment on some things that the Bible says there's really no moral judgment here. I'm just telling you a story.
Yeah, and you can take whatever you want because they found favor with you.
The Bible does say do not judge.
Busted.
What are we doing?
Here, one of the things to note here is that it's often tied like to chen in the eyes of something. And so just like when we looked at it early on, where there was this garland or these objects that carried beauty or this charm that could be deceitful, that it was in the eyes of the beholder. And in this is an example of it's in the eyes of the Egyptians, that this is chen, and it's an action that's being done, not just an object, but it's also in the eyes of. And this is used in a few different places as well. So in Genesis 30, Genesis chapter 30, verse 27, it says, "But Laban said to Jacob, if I have found favor in your eyes, stay with me. I have divined that the Lord has blessed me on your account."
What was that one?
Genesis chapter 30, verse 27.
Oh, he just so- I have found favor in your sight.
That's one translation. So chapter 30, verse 27.
He said to him, if you allow me to say so, I have learned by divination, I can't even say that. That the Lord
Divination.
has blessed me because of you. Is that
Yeah.
what you want?
Yeah. So this, like what's translated loosely, like if you allow me to say so, is often sometimes translated as if I have found favor in your eyes as well.
Are we still on KAHANUN?
We're still on grace. Yep, these are all layers of grace. We have not deviated from that.
We could write a dictionary on.
Remember, we're
meaning of
using an
grace.
encyclopedia
Yeah.
understandings, not dictionary
Yes.
understandings. So if I
Mine just says, because the Lord has blessed me.
What does it say before that?
Please listen to me, Laban replied. I have become wealthy, for the Lord has blessed me because of you.
There's a large, like, as I'm hearing these translation, there's a large, like, different, it would be interesting. I wish if Hannah was here, she'd have her.
Yes,
Um,
I will bring that the next
Yeah,
time.
that, I really like. the
I like
translation
that
does.
translation very much.
It seems really close too. It really pulls the Hebrew nicely, I think. So we have this, like, there's also, right in this story, there's a bit of a power, like subversion of power structures that's occurring. And so that's a part of Chen too, this like subversion of power structures that's occurring between Laban and Jacob as well. So this is grace. We're still on grace, remember?
Well, Laban really done him wrong.
Yeah. Let's go to Genesis 33. Genesis chapter 33, verse 11. And remember, you can find all of these different things on your own as well. Like if we went into Logos or any other Bible and looked up the strong number, and you could just see where it is in all of the different verses that a word appears in. One of the things you have to be aware of is that words have different forms. And so you might need to take, just like in English, we add ings on the end of words, or and so you might have to go to the root word to try to find some of the ones that are related. So chapter 33 in Genesis, verse 11.
Please accept my gift that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have everything I want. So he urged him, and he took it. Is that the one you want?
Yeah, and that's it.
Sounds almost like the other verse.
It does, yeah. So this is an example of God's grace. Please accept my gift that is brought to you, because God has dealt chen with me, and because I have everything I want. So he urged him, and he took it. This so this is an interesting one because it's God has blessed him, and then Jacob is taking this gift and blessing Esau with it too, which is this grace, this graciousness is being passed on. So this graciousness that came from God, this graciousness is then being passed on to Esau as well. So we kind of have a double grace here that we get to see. Grace at work. So we've added a few layers. And if we looked at more, we would add more layers. So now, how would you define or give an encyclopedia of grace?
It can be good or bad.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Wow.
There's also in the Bible requests for God to chen or chanun, which would be like in Psalm 4, Psalm chapter 4, verse 1. So this is something that God does. It's something that people do. It's something that people can carry. It could be objects. And in Psalm 4:1, we have people speaking to God. Answer me when I call, O God of my right. You gave me room when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer.
that goes right back to entreating or making a supplication to God, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So this can be done, techen or chanun, can be done between people, and it can be done with God.
Mhm.
And not only is it pleading for favor, but it is also favor itself and charm itself and elegance itself as well. So it's like that which can be asked for and received all at the same time, all in one word. And what is.
Does mercy work that way? Be merciful. Please have mercy. I grant you mercy.
I think that's different.
You mean in English,
Yeah.
like to mercy,
Can it be used the
Yeah,
same way
yes.
as?
because you could have mercy, you could give mercy, you could, and then mercy is something. It doesn't have the same thing as like, like to be elegant, like you wouldn't have a mercy object.
Right. The noun or the adjective.
Right. Which isn't used quite as often. It's more the verb and noun that it's used.
So grace, gracious, graceful. That's better.
If people have a little more time, I'm going to add another layer and then we'll watch the Bible study video.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to share this poem. This poem is by Katia Moldovsky, she's fluent in both Yiddish and Hebrew, and she was born in 1894 and died in 1975. And so she knew both World War I and World War II, both of them. And so wrote poetry in that time period. And she's got a poem called El Kanun, okay, which would mean God. If we Kanun, we're saying is grace. God is grace. The translator translates as God is merciful. And so we have these two words, and even the translation is, so there's an overlap, because even translators have overlap within these. And I was going to have us listen to it in Hebrew, but the audio wasn't working properly. And so I'm just going to share my screen so you can see the poem up on the screen, and I will read it. It's called El Chanun, Merciful God. Choose another people, elect another. We have no more blood to be a sacrifice. Our house has become a desert. The earth is insufficient for our graves. No more laments for us, no more dirges in the old holy books. Merciful God, sanctify another country, another mountain. We have strewn all the fields and every stone with ash, with holy ash, with the aged, with the youthful, and with babies we have paid for every letter of your 10 commandments. Merciful God, raise your fiery brow and see the peoples of the world. Give them the prophecies in the days of awe. Your word is babbled in every language. Teach them the deeds, the ways of temptation. Merciful God, give us simple garments of shepherds with their sheep, blacksmiths at their hammers, laundry washers, skin flayers, and even the more base. And do us one more favor, merciful God. Deprive us of the divine presence of genius.
The divine presence of what?
Genius.
What I thought you said.
This was written in, it says 1945, But I thought it was written in 1944.
What was her name?
Kadia, Kadia, and I fear I am mispronouncing her last name. So it's Molodowsky.
WSKY. Okay.
So I wanted to share this poem because it brings another layer to it as well, with events from the world that we are aware of as well. And so it's titled this El Hanun, this God of grace, and it appeals to this God of grace in the midst of just all this tragedy that has been seen.
It sounds like she says, pick on somebody else for a change. You know, leave
Yeah.
us alone. We don't want to be the chosen people anymore because,
Of all the.
yeah.
torments.
Because like she said, the ground isn't sufficient to hold all of our graves.
So this has within it our limited English understanding of grace. God be gracious on us, like to relieve this suffering. But it also carries with it this pleading as well. That's a part of this Hanun as well. And so it's tied with one another. This pleading and this favor is wrapped within it.
That's powerful. That is a powerful poem.
And if
So where was she born?
she was born, she lived in Warsaw and then Odessa for a while, and then immigrated to the US. She wasn't born in Warsaw though. I don't remember where she was.
Was she in the camps though?
Not to my knowledge, no.
'Cause
So she immigrated to the US before World War II started.
Because the first stanza seems like she's could be talking about the camps of all the people that are dying there when she says that the earth is no longer suitable for our bodies, our
Yes.
graves.
So she would have been, I mean, she would have known what was happening because she lived after the war as well. And that would have been in media too, what was going on. But she also was teaching children right after World War One. And so World War One also had a lot of devastation as well. And so is the devastation of World War One as well, that she would have seen firsthand as she was teaching children in Warsaw in those areas.
So do we assume she's Jewish?
Yes, she is Jewish, and she learned Yiddish, I think, from her mother and Hebrew from her father.
So he might have been a rabbi,
I don't know that he was a rabbi.
but a teacher.
I thought they were like grocers or something. But well educated, and just has a lot of different poetry.
Wow.
And so this is just one of her pieces. I have about a 4-minute video on grace from the Bible Project. And so we'll see the Bible Project, they always do a good job of pulling it together. So we've got a lot of different layers, and now hopefully it'll play really well for us and not freeze.
Can you imagine how big the Bible would be if they had?
If you tried to describe what God is like,
Oh, footnotes to explain all of it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think probably easier just learn Hebrew.
Probably would.
if you tried to describe what God is like, it could be difficult or daunting. But when the people who wrote the Bible pondered the mystery of God, they consistently describe God's character in this way: compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, overflowing with loyal love and faithfulness. We're going to look at the second key word in this statement, gracious. The Hebrew word is chanun, which is related to the Hebrew noun chen. This word, chen, is often translated as grace or favor, and if you study how this word is used throughout the Bible, you find a fascinating story. One meaning of chen is delightful or favorable. In the Psalms, a skilled poet is said to have lips of chen. That is, he can craft beautiful words that bring delight. Or a dazzling piece of jewelry is an ornament of chen. It attracts attention and favor. This is why chen is often the word used to describe a gift given with delight or favor. In these cases, chen could be translated as grace. Like in the story of Esther, who approaches the king of Persia to ask that she and her people be spared from death. She calls this a request for chen. And because the king delights in Esther, he favors her and grants her wish. So, giving a gift of favor is chen because it's motivated by delight. And the most extreme kind of chen is showing favor to someone who should get what they deserve, not a generous gift. Like Jacob, who cheated his brother Esau, ran away, and then after 20 years wants to come back and make things right. So he comes to Esau asking, "May I find chen in your eyes?" Jacob isn't asking for what is fair, but for favor. And surprisingly, that's what Esau gives him. He chooses to delight in his brother Jacob and show him grace that he doesn't deserve. Now, chen requires a generous spirit, which people sometimes have. But in the Bible, the one who shows more chen than anyone else is God. Like when God rescued the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and they quickly betray him by giving their allegiance to a golden idol as their God. But then, Moses
Yeah. All right, hopefully it'll just.
generous spirit, which people sometimes have. But in the Bible, the one who shows more chen than anyone else is God. Like when God rescued the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and they quickly betray him by giving their allegiance to a golden idol as their God. But then, Moses steps in and asks God to consider giving a gift that they don't deserve. And God says yes, by showing the ultimate act of chen, forgiveness and a promise to be with these people. This character trait of God is so reliable that over 40 times in the book of Psalms, people cry out for God's chen when they're sick or in danger, or when the Israelites are in exile. And the biblical prophets like Isaiah looked back to God's chen in the past and boldly declared that God will one day show chen to his people by delivering them and all creation from death and ruin. Now, when we turn to the authors of the New Testament, they describe God's chen with the Greek word charis, which means gracious gift. Like when we're introduced to Jesus in the Gospel of John, we're told that Jesus is God's glorious charis become human, sent into a world of people trapped in darkness and death. Because according to the Apostle Paul, we're like the living dead. God has handed humanity over to the destructive consequences of our selfish decisions. But, Paul says, God is rich in mercy, and by his charis, he's rescued us. He's talking about how Jesus' life, death, and resurrection are offered to us as a generous gift of life that is more powerful than death. And as with any gift, all one has to do is receive it. So, now you can see why the biblical authors talk so much about this description of God's character throughout the Bible. When people are willing to own their failures and ask God for chen, he has a consistent and generous response. God gives the gift of himself, his life, and his love. And this is what it means that God is gracious.
The prodigal son asked for hen when he came back to his father and his brother. Or is that different?
I think he just asked for like
Might have.
Barely, didn't he ask for like nothing? He said, just
Yeah.
let me eat from what his dad showed him. Excuse
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't looked at those in Hebrew, so that would be interesting to see if it says that he asked for that, or if it even says this is what the Father gave him. But definitely, I mean, that's what the Father gave him.
Right.
Okay.
Any last thoughts on grace? Do we muddy it and make it a little clearer at the same time?
No, you muddied it.
I was
Well,
gonna say
good.
right now it's all mud for me, but my head is going, whoo.
These are words that for much of our life, I think as Christians feel clear to us a lot of times. And so it's good for them to be muddied.
Yes,
because
I
that's
quite
part of our
agree.
faith, to be
I quite agree.
in the mud.
The journey.
So our next class, we won't have class next week. Next week's Holy Week. And then we won't have class on Easter Monday. So we'll have 2 weeks without class. And so I have
So we have
homework.
plenty of time to work on this.
I've got homework for you.
Oh, gee, thanks.
Should you choose to accept? So yeah, so should you choose to accept the homework? So it'll be, our next class is April 17th. So it's 21 days. And so one thought I had for homework was to pick one of the Gospels and read it between now, all the way through, to read the Gospel between now and our next class on April 17th, which is roughly, for any of the Gospels, is about 1 chapter a day. And I'll email out a reading schedule for people for the like super achievers, then you can read Matthew, and for the people who you're not even going to read 1 chapter a day, then read Mark, you need 16 chapters. so I'll send that out.
I like John.
John's right in the middle, so I think that one you could just
Do
read.
you want us to do different ones, or doesn't it matter? if
Pick
we do
whichever one
similar?
you'd like.
Okay.
And
Because that would be good, because everybody will have different understanding.
yeah, and I'm going to email out a list of all the words that we've been learning. And
okay.
so, and then as you're reading, pay attention to, maybe you just pick one, maybe you pick a couple. Where do these concepts, don't worry about like trying to find the exact word, where do these concepts show up within the gospel that you're reading?
That's
So
that would be
grace
good.
and mercy and compassion.
I'm going to send it back all the way back to dwell, Yahweh. I'm
Oh,
going to
boy.
send you a whole list.
Okay,
And you can just pick one.
okay.
Love, hope,
Okay.
joy. Or if like that feels like too much, just read the gospel and listen to the story as if for the first time. So there's levels of
Yeah.
involvement for
Yeah.
these next few
Maybe I'll
weeks.
pick
Yeah.
Mark.
Well,
And I'm gonna
the
email
more
this
you
out.
read though, the
I
more
know.
opportunity you have to find the words
Right.
she's going to send to us.
Right.
So then we'll get together on April 17th, and
Okay,
and we'll continue with these words, but as in from Exodus 34. But I'd also be interested just what types of things you found as
Mhm.
you were reading, especially as we're entering into Holy Week, and you'll be hearing these stories in worship too,
Mhm.
and Monday, Thursday worship, and it's
Mhm.
just you'll be hearing the same
Mhm.
stories again and again, but you'll have this wider context, and not just the wider context of the gospel story, but
Mhm.
now you have this wider context of the Hebrew story and these layers of the Hebrew words around that as well. And so maybe it'll sound different this year.
Yes. You can see it with new ears
Yeah.
Yeah.
or hear it with new eyes,
Yeah.
whatever.
See, I think that when we say that in English, we're just living up to the different meanings in Hebrew.
With your eyes wide shut. Now may you open my
I need to